Joining us now is political analyst Sanusha Naidu. A very good evening to you, Ms. Naidu. Great to be chatting to you once again. A little bit of feedback regarding President Cyril Ramaphosa's SONA last night. Various political parties weighed in as to be expected. The IFP's Kulekwa Hlenga said that there was nothing or very little that was new, very little that was inspiring. The EFF literally called it insanity, saying that the president is repeating exactly the same thing over and over again, yet expecting a different result. But in your view, how would you rate the president's speech yesterday?
Good evening, Tommy, to the listeners, and I hope you're well and safe. It was a speech that at times you thought, here it comes. It's going to be something that's going to be really important. When he announced the 4 priority areas, I thought, right, we're going to have a clear mandate, clear timeframes, implemental project timeframes, and so forth. But overall, the speech kind of felt flat. It kind of gave us a kind of overview of what was achieved in a very difficult and unprecedented 2020, but it never really captured an imagination of myself. I thought that it was a speech where the president tried, in all due respect to the president, to the circumstances we find ourselves in, he tried. And he tried to put the spin on the positive. But there were things that I thought he could actually go further on. For example, he could have been much more elaborative and substantive on, say, setting a time frame for when the spectrum auction will happen. The other issue that I thought he could be much more decisive on was saying to us, we got this AstraZeneca vaccine. We know that its efficacy is under the spotlight in terms of the kind of variant we have in South Africa. He did well in saying we're going to source what I call a cocktail of vaccines from different manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies in order to deal with the South African context of the virus. But there were things that I thought that he didn't really touch on in much more detail. I thought business must have been happy about the infrastructure plan, but I thought creating 2 agencies and a commission and another panel on corruption, that's not how we deal with the issue of what's currently beguiles us and bedevils us in society today. And that is, people wanted to know, how do you align the State of the Nation address to the realistic conditions that I live in? I think that was completely out of kilter in the speech. It was not even there at times. And then, of course, the pet peeve of the smart city. I mean, it's just a master plan. It's going to be a smart city that's going to bring in 300 to 500,000 people. But let's bear in mind, you can't do all of that if your spectrum is out of sync. So I think at the end of the day, it was a speech which I thought, in the circumstances around which he had to deliver it, he tried, but it wasn't a speech that flew.
And what do you believe that the president missed as far as an opportunity is concerned to regain the trust of South Africans? We've been all watching and listening to the State Capture Commission of Inquiry into corruption. We've been hearing how Parliament has failed in its oversight role. We're seeing leaders known, respected, with a legacy of their own, coming before, commissions of inquiry, their integrity being questioned. What more do you believe the president could have done in order to turn the page regarding this and to once again make South Africans gain trust in government?
I'm not sure, Tommy. I think that the bigger thing would have been if it was just an honest speech, a speech that said, dear South Africans, we have not delivered. We tried. We had this Black Swan event that threw us out of kilter. But part of it is that the Black Swan event, or the COVID-19 event, wasn't something that happened over a 5-year period. It happened in 2020. Much of what we are talking about, the infrastructure questions, the spatial inequality issues, the deepening poverty, the unemployment rate, which he says is at its highest ever, these things were in the mix for a long time. And I think what I really wanted to see, if we could turn the page and reestablish the trust, is maybe set up a much more vigilant approach for bureaucratic inertia, where he said something in the speech where people who are not performing, heads would roll, and it's no time for you to be in this bureaucracy. Well, I would like them to take it in a much more proactive way, expedite the fact that those that are holding up the bureaucratic a rollout of all of these services that we're talking about, they need to basically make heads roll. And we're not seeing that happen. And every time the president comes to speak, I think the general sense outside is, oh no, what is he going to say that's going to make any difference to my livelihood? The thing that really he missed in the speech is making the speech aligned to the pocket of the people on the street and in the realities that they live, because that never came out. You can't keep saying that we're going to do this. We're going to roll out 100 million infrastructure project for connecting the N1, N2, and N3, bringing those roads together. When in fact, things like potholes, access to water, poor sanitation is easy things that are not being done. And that is where the infrastructure needs to be focused on.
Would you not say, though, Sanusha, that when the president said we need to now hire competent people in local government, that he was actually talking about that? Because really those are the type, the potholes, all of those really have to do a lot with the local governments. In some ways, maybe questioning cadre deployment, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think cadre deployment has always been questionable. But if he's going to start hiring competent people in local government, he has to start with who gets on the list for local government. That's where the bun fight happens. That's where it becomes a very dangerous precedent where people are actually fighting to get on that list because they see getting into local government and getting positions in local government as their bread and butter. This is where I'm going to make my money. This is where I'm going to basically define my livelihood. So that's going to be a bigger task for the president because he has to deal with the Thuli House, but he also has to deal with the branches and the constituencies where cadre deployment is taking place. And if he's talking about a professionalized public service and a professionalized local government, then it means that you've got to vet those lists and make sure that the people you put there stay on those lists and don't get bumped off those lists, both literally and figuratively.
That in itself is a mammoth task, and it's one that will really put the president in the midst of a political internal storm inside the African National Congress. How possible is it for the president to be able to achieve this, also considering the fact that there are factions and there are divisions within the party that he leads?
A very, very difficult one, because he's got to basically fend off so many different factions. He has to decide that there are those that are thinking about him as a one-term president. There are those that are, he's going into this NEC meeting this weekend where he has to now discuss questions of the step aside issue, which hasn't really taken root in the ANC at the moment. And of course, the question of Ace Magashule and the Integrity Commission. There's questions about the political party funding, and that's going to open up a whole Pandora's box there. And the point about it is that if he puts this proposal on the ground, he's going to actually start getting into territory, uncharted territory, of where people's livelihoods are going to be upended. And some people are going to take complete disregard to that. They're going to become offended. And of course, they may say, well, we don't need this president now. And I think that's the challenge, that with the kind of approach that he wants to take and have a professionalized public service and professionalized individuals at local government level, he runs the risk of who is going to basically come up and say, we don't agree with you and we need to remove you, as opposed to you removing me.
You mentioned the political party funding, and there's something that John Steenhuisen said in a conversation that one of my colleagues had with him outside Parliament yesterday. He said that reforms must be passed in the House, talking about the plans that the president was talking about. Which are the bills and the reforms that you believe need to be passed quite expeditiously in the House in order to effect the change that is really needed in our country? So many South Africans just before the SONA were talking and complaining and saying that what we need now is implementation. Enough of plans already.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few bills that are going to be appearing before this Parliament as they return to work. I think the one that has already produced controversy is the land expropriation one, where I hear the ad hoc committee wants to get through the process without going through the proper channel of public consultation. The DA has indicated that that is going to be a non grata approach, because they believe that it has to go through due process in Parliament. The other one would be the amendment of sections for the municipality to be able to procure from independent power pool and producers, and that would be something that will have to also be considered if we if we look at the fact that our electricity grid, our electricity capacity, and our output is really constrained. Now, that will have to go through the necessary processes. But I think what is important here, this is an election year, and I think both the land expropriation bill and, of course, the question around the municipalities being able to buy from independent power producers, and there's a section in that bill that needs to be revised. I think these are two very key issues for the local government election. But there are other issues. There are other bills that are still lagging behind from 2010. The state bill on state information. There needs to be clarity on that. And of course, we need to know in terms of COVID-19 what kind of electoral system or what kind of conducting of the election will take place. You know, is there a plan in place for PPP, social distancing, making sure people are safe, making sure that the requisite sanitation is taking place, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this, again, will mean, do you have to go back to the electoral court, have some kind of revision of the act with the conducting of the election? The problem with the Political Party Funding Act and the independent candidates that are able to contest this is an ongoing thing. I think the Political Party Act comes into effect in April, whereas the Constitutional Court that decided that independent candidates can contest an election, that's still an ongoing thing. And that, again, is for the Electoral Court to decide. So I think in this election year, there will be the legislation where you will find that you may have members in Parliament trying to fast track this. And I think they're going to have opposition parties that are going to pull it back and say, you can't do this, particularly on the land expropriation issue.
Sanusha, we'll leave it at that for this evening, but always great talking to you. Thank you for your insights. That's political analyst, Ms. Sanusha Naidu. She takes us to a really quick break, but we'll be back in just a moment as we wrap up some of the leading stories on this day.